let's start. So my name is Saga Arola. I'm the head of pedagogy at Moomin Language School and Playvation. And for those of you who don't know what Moomin Language School is, it's an early language learning service for kindergartens and schools. It's based on research and uses Finnish education principles to teach. So a lot of playful learning and also storytelling, which I think we're going to hear about soon from Jenni as well. And I'm joined today by Jenni Vartiainen from Kides Science. Jenni, say hi so people can see you.
Hi, everyone. Great to see that there are so many joining us today.
Wonderful. So Jenni is a co-founder of Kides Science, and she has a PhD in early science education, which is really interesting. She's a researcher and a university lecturer in Tampere University. And she focuses on early childhood education and science education, specifically in early childhood education. So today we'll be talking about combining this science education with language learning and how that works, because oftentimes people tend to think of science education and language learning as opposites, like you have to choose one or the other, but this isn't really the case. And I think a very good example is that both Moomin Language School and Kides Science, even though the subjects, so to speak, are different, we're both using storytelling to do this. So very interesting to hear about this. So without further ado, Jenni, I'm going to give the floor to you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Saga. So today I'm going to tell you something about ideas how to combine earlier science education and bring also aspects of language learning there. And I'm doing that so that we will talk about multiliteracies and what aspects multiliteracy theories can bring to both of these learning areas. And I come from Kides Science. Kides Science is a company from Finland that helps teachers to implement high quality and play-based science education with children between ages 8 to 6 years old. I will now share my screen. I have some slides here to help you follow the ideas. Okay, so as Saga mentioned, it's the case that often people might think that science education and language learning has very little in common. But when we look at these from the viewpoint of multiliteracy, we find very interesting similarities and cases where these two can support each other. First, let's look at two things that are very natural to young children. And the first thing is that children are the masters of wondering. Every one of you who have been interacting with young children, you know that children ask a lot of questions. In a matter of fact, research says that a young child might ask even 107 questions during one day on the average. So that makes huge amount of questions per, for example, 1 week. And questions are extremely important for our learning. And questions are important especially for our lifelong learning journey. So we want to raise adults that are curious, that have capability to wonder and ask questions, because that is always the starting point for learning. And we want to maintain young children's natural curiosity and ability to wonder. But there is at the moment a little concern, because we also know from the research that when children grow older, they tend to lose their ability to ask questions. There is a research that says, or that research was observing children when they were at the first and second grade. And at that age, during 2-hour observation period, children asked around 5 to 6 questions. So it's quite huge drop compared to 107 questions per day with 3 to 4 years old children. And when they observed children at 5th and 6th grade, there were observation periods where none question was asked. So, of course, there are plenty of reasons why this happens, but it's still something that we want to hold tight on, that children want to wonder and ask questions. And second thing that is natural for young children, children make meanings through narrative thinking. So when children want to share something or tell what has happened, they put it in a form of a narrative. So for a human being, first develop capability of narrative thinking. And if we pay attention to our pedagogy and learning, we can help children to develop narrative thinking towards scientific thinking. And we can help children to use narratives in different kind of learning, in science learning and in language learning, both, also in many other learning areas as well. But the question we are trying to answer today is, what does pedagogy that takes these two aspects into consideration look like? So how we can help children grow as curious and question-asking adults, and how we can use narratives to help children develop thinking skills. So I think one angle to this question can be found from multiliteracy theories. So let's look at what aspects multiliteracy perspective can bring to science education. But first, I think we should define what we mean by multiliteracy. Multiliteracy is a concept that emerged in Finnish early childhood education curriculum during the latest reform we had. And it's also present in many other national curriculums. And what we mean by multiliteracy. Multiliteracy, in its broad meaning, is literacy for now and the future. So multiliteracy brings together aspects and skills that we need as raw human beings and living in this very quickly increasingly diverse world. So multiliteracy seeks to provide the capability to evaluate information, arguments, and opinions, and very important point is that also provide skills to challenge information and opinions when needed. We all know that during one day, we might meet huge amount of information that comes to us, for example, through our social media feeds. And at least in my social media, I see a lot of well-grounded opinions. I see a lot of information that is based on research. I see a lot of information that comes from trustworthy references. But what I also see is a lot of opinions. I see misinformation. I see disinformation. So it's increasingly important that we teach already to our young children how we could handle all this information, how we can see what is trustworthy and what is something where people try to affect us in not so good ways. And these skills, they start building in children's early years. And if we have this huge amount of information nowadays in our lives, my educated guess is that it won't get any smaller, that amount, in the future. So by multiliteracy, we seek to teach children how to interpret, use, and produce different kind of texts in different situations, and how we use different kind of media in an appropriate manner. And then let's look a bit 3 different phases that multiliteracy has. So first of all, multiliteracy refers to multiple forms of texts. So multi means that nowadays we don't have texts anymore in the form of written text anymore. So that's only one form of texts that we have. So text is defined in a board definition, and text, it can be written, but it can be spoken, it can be drawn, or it can be even sung. And each kind of text has their own signs and their own symbol systems. For example, in music, you have to be able to read notes to understand the language of the music. Or in science, you might have to be, or not even might, but you have to be able at some point to understand, for example, symbols of chemical elements, to be able to communicate in the language of chemistry. Multiliteracy refers also to the diversity and tolerance. So we aim to understand different kind of cultural contextualities and the rules that exist in different cultures. And with culture, I mean also, for example, what kind of rules we have in children's culture, or what kind of contextualities we have in elderly people culture, and how we can understand each other and how we can communicate so that everyone gets their voices heard. So diversity refers also to the idea how we provide different kind of people possibility to get their voices heard. And when we talk about young children, this is extremely important, because we know that young children should have ability to act as active agents of decisions that concern them. They should be active agents in their own learning processes, and we should be able to hear children's voices. And then when we look at multiliteracy as a skill, it develops in interaction. So multiliteracy skills are acquired by participating in different activities in different communities. So we can't build understanding in isolation, but we always, when we produce, for example, different kind of texts, we always aim it to someone to serve some kind of purposes. And that doesn't develop if we try to do it alone. So multiliteracy is not an independent skill, but rather it is a set of overlapping practices. And these practices can take different forms depending on the context. And in my research work, I have been contextualizing multiliteracy through so-called dynamic literacy theory. And dynamic literacy theory sees that there are different dimensions in literacy. And there is operational dimension, cultural dimension, and critical dimension. And to open up a bit these concepts, I will next present you how these dimensions look like when we talk about early science education. So in the context of science, practices of multiliteracy might take the following forms. So when we look at multiliteracy in the context of science from the cultural point of view, it means that we should help children practice skills that are needed to become a competent meaning maker. And that means that children should be able to join the process of science. So how we produce knowledge in science. So not just sharing the knowledge to children, but participating them in the process. And of course, it needs some basic skills, science skills. For example, how to do observations, how to measure, how to classify. And when we look at operational part of science in the context of multiliteracy, and now I see that there is cultural and operational mixed up, so don't worry. So we should be able to understand science as a cultural practice. It's as in any fields of science, you can't produce new knowledge alone, but you have to have someone to share information with. And in science, there are also its own rules and values, signs and practices you have to be able to handle. And very important thing is to notice that science occurs in children's living cultures, and how we can frame science education so that children can feel it meaningful for themselves. And of course, there is critical point of view. So we have to be able to give children possibilities to grow as critical thinkers in science-related context with science-related texts. And that requires ability to ask questions, and ask those questions about scientific processes, and also question the results. And in Kide Science, we have expanded the concept of science education by multiliteracy as a wider perspective. So in the multiliteracy approach to science, we can help children to co-construct meanings of concepts and words by inquiries. And that also helps children to learn the language while they are making meanings of concepts by acting with them. And in Kide Science pedagogy, we hold that language is dominant cultural tool to mediate meanings. And that's why we take language and set it in a central role also in the science process. So how we help children to communicate and verbalize their thinking and their processes while they are learning about science. And we know from the earlier research that there are many good experiences when there is studies around integrated science education and language learning. And that revealed that this kind of integrated approach can enhance children's understanding of scientific concepts and science process skills, but also enhance their language skills. So in this context was studied children's reading and writing skills, and even those were improved, but also when we see language learning as a wider perspective about how to communicate. And back to idea of stories. So stories are well known to promote children's language development, but also storytelling is a powerful gateway to enter in this kind of scientific play worlds where we really can invite children to the playful environment where they can do inquiries and they can be active agents, finding out solutions for the questions and problems they have noticed in their own lives. So I'm wrapping up my presentation here, just saying that stories are very effective pedagogical tool to scaffold children's scientific processes and help them verbalize their observations and thinking, and thus helping children to become multiliterate adults someday. And I also would like you to remember that when we talk about concepts, those are not only words, but they are also about how we can feel the concepts, what we can do with it, and how we can, for example, play with concepts. I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have now questions you might want to ask from me. So I will stop the sharing now.
Thank you, Jenny. That was very, very interesting. And I was thinking about that the whole time you're talking about like science and all of that. And the language that, I mean, we learn things primarily through language. Of course, there's other things that come into it, but when we're explaining things and all of these, doing these activities, we have language, it's always integrated into it. So it's a very good way to kind of include both, where we were talking before about this, like if you're learning a foreign language, you could first learn about the experiment that you're going to do, so you can learn about the language there and practice the vocabulary and any sentence structures there, and then do that experiment in the foreign language and with the support of the teacher. And that kind of gives a very good basis, very good situation for practicing both skills. So this is a very kind of Finnish education model, that we are not learning just one subject at a time, we're learning multiple things. And that's very kind of, especially in early education.
Yes, and that way words, concepts, they become meaningful for children. They can relate those into their own living cultures.
Exactly. We have some questions. So there's one question. What is your opinion on self-directed learning? It really connects with the values you're talking about, and I'm wondering if there is any space for it in your platforms. Any thoughts on that, Jenny?
So if I think about Kidescience approach, there our platform is used so that only teacher uses it. So children will not use our platform. I know that is a bit different with Moomin Language School, but that is Kidescience approach. So we want to emphasize social learning, so that teacher gets all the pedagogical advice, teacher get the lesson plans, teacher gets the knowledge about how they should instruct children in their learning processes. So then experiments will be done in a group to enhance communication between children and of course between child and adult.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, of course, when we're talking about very young children, we can't completely let them loose. There needs to be some kind of support, of course, from the teacher. But I believe that this when we're based on Finnish education, this self-directedness is supported throughout the activities that we do in Kide Science, the experiment lessons, and same with Moomin Language School when we have both the application and then the playful lessons. So this is like, we take the small steps to give the children the support that they need in order to become self-directed learners.
Yes.
Very interesting question. Thank you so much for that, Bruno.
Yes.
Another question. Let's see, we have quite a lot of questions actually. So someone would like you to specify a little bit about story-based approach. Can you share a little bit more?
Sure. So I can tell, of course, how I see story-based approach. In learning, there are, of course, plenty of definitions for the same concepts also, but in my mind, story-based approach is such that we present children a story, and that story brings up the questions that children are going to solve in their inquiry process. So story is used to set the problems in a wider context, so that children can have this mental image in their heads. What is this related to? And the story is aimed to arouse children's interest and help children to pose questions. And then we use stories to scaffold children's inquiry process. So when children are starting to do some scientific inquiries, they might at some point forget what was the aim of their working, because they are quite young when we talk about 3 to 6 years old children. So we can remind them about their aim by referring back to the story. Did you remember in this story happened this and this, and now you are solving this and this? And we can also help children to develop critical thinking skills by reflecting their results, for example, to story. How the story character would use this piece of knowledge you produced to solve the problem that character, for example, had in the story. So I use story-based approach that way. And also when we are at the end point of inquiry, we can help children to draw conclusions so that they have the words to talk about the phenomenon, the concepts they were inquiring. So they can draw conclusions so that they can utilize that story world.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Another question, is it too difficult for children in kindergarten to learn science integrated with second language, and what age is suitable? What do you think about that, Jenny?
Well, first of all, we always have to look at what are our goals. Everything starts with goals. And for example, in science education, the most important goals are that children can practice so-called science process skills. So what we need to find out, and these are quite simple things like how to do observations, how we collect knowledge about something utilizing our senses, and how we communicate these observations to other people. So at least from the science point of view, we are in a world where we kind of experience concepts. We are not trying to teach children how to word out what is the concept of surface tension, but we aim them to experience different aspects of surface tension, for example. And from my point of view, combining foreign language to this kind of very hands-on, very experienced and sense-based activities is very effective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I don't think it is too difficult because, as you said, young children, anything that they are learning, even if the thing that they're learning, like something like critical thinking or observation skills, like you said, even though it is a big thing, but of course with very young children, we don't start from the highest level of that skill, but we start with baby steps. and those can very well be integrated with foreign language learning. And at least the way we see it in Moomin Language School is that when we are teaching a language to young children, it doesn't mean that you have to do everything just in that language. You can definitely also talk about the language, which is very important for the language awareness of children. So you can talk about what is this word in our mother tongue, what is it in the foreign language, and kind of use that as a help. So there's no rule that you're not allowed to sort of help the children through the mother tongue. All right, very good. We're going a little bit over time, but there are so many interesting questions. So if any of you need to leave, we will be sending you the recording afterwards. So feel free to do that. But let's see, let's take a couple more questions and then end it here. Let's see. Another having to do with age, I think you quite well answered that, but how early is a child able to handle multiliteracy? And is there any differences between girls and boys in your experience?
Well, I think that as long or as early as children start to communicate, we can start practicing skills of multiliteracy. So as I said, multiliteracy skills, they develop in interaction. So by giving children possibilities to communicate, to interact in different environments with different kind of people, with different kind of contexts, then we can help children to widen that idea. What is the text? How I interpret? How I produce different kind of messages to get my voice heard. And I think that starts very, very early. And of course, we have to think about what is the age of child, and then a bit change the ways we help children to communicate. And with boys and girls, I wouldn't say that there are any kind of differences, and in the matter of facts, I think that it's a bit it's much larger question when we start talking about boys and girls. Those are very heavily cultural dependent things that usually come from children from the surrounding culture. So I think that every single child should be able to express their selves just as they think they are. And
absolutely, I definitely agree with that. Going back a little bit on the learning multiliteracy at an early age, because the way I understand multiliteracy is effectively it's about communication. It's communicating with the world through various different kinds of means. And children, from the very first moment they are born, they are trying to communicate with us. They're trying to communicate with the world. So I don't see there being any kind of discord between teaching multiliteracy, although the word it's a big word, but basically that's what it means. It's communication, if we want to put it in a very simple term. All right, very good. One more question. It's about learning storytelling and learning language. So any tips on how to use storytelling when kids still have limited vocabulary in English? Or do we need to use their own language when we're thinking about mixing science and English? I have some ideas for that, but you can, Jenny, maybe go first if you have any pointers.
Yeah. Yes, well, as Saga very well said earlier, that you don't have to necessarily put everything into the foreign language if you are utilizing, for example, storytelling. But I think Saga is the one who have more views on that storytelling and foreign language learning aspect. But I would say that when we bring science education to that in a form that I think science education should be effective, then the aspects of storytelling, they become alive while children are starting the hands-on part and that sensory-based experience part of that learning journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, my things that just came to my mind regarding the storytelling. Stories are really good for kind of giving that input in the foreign language. And children don't need to understand everything in the story when we're reading it. I mean, think of, your toddlers. They don't understand every word that you say when you're reading a, bedtime story to them, oftentimes. So in this way, you can definitely use it with young children, and a lot of pictures. If you have anything like different sounds that you can use, that makes it very, very interesting to the children, and that helps them also understand. So very much this multi-sensory storytelling as well. Pictures always help the children understand what's going on in the story, even if they don't understand the language. So hopefully that helps a little bit. If you do want to go more into it, please feel free to contact us. I think you'll be directed to our website after the webinar, so you can contact us, and we will be sharing also Jenni's and Kide Science's contact information when we send the email. So we'll send you an email afterwards with some more information then as well. Thank you so much. This has been a very, very interesting webinar. Thank you, Jenni, for interesting information and tips and insights.
Thank you very much. And thanks for everyone who took the time to spend this a bit over half an hour with us today.
Yes. All right. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully we will see you in our next webinars as well. Have a lovely morning, night, day, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, and see you soon again. Bye.
Bye.